Welcome, everyone. I'm Subdeacon Vincent Michael. I'm the Assistant Director at the St. Charbel Center. Um, and we're very happy to host Chorbishop Seely Beggiani. And so hand it off to you, Chorbishop.
Thank you, Subdeacon. Again, I'm glad to be with you all tonight. What I want to do this evening is to continue on a topic that I started last week, and that was beginning to go into the stages of the spiritual life according to the Desert Fathers primarily. And we were on the first stage, which the Eastern writers and even the Western writers seem to agree, primarily because many of the Eastern ideas went over into the West early on. So last week we started to talk about the ascetical life, and we ended up with the writings of Evagrius, who was of a Greek background, but who spent many years in the African deserts with the hermits and the monks, and who wrote very extensively about their ideas and their writings and their insights. And his works have been published in not only among the Greek world, but certainly also among the Syriac world. And so what we have then is a very detailed series of ideas and themes about how the spiritual life is to progress. Now, as we mentioned last week, Evagrius himself, in his book on this stage in the spiritual life, the Practicos, gives us a kind of statement as to how this stage it works. And he says that faith gives way to fear of God. Fear of God gives way to doing the commandments. The commandments lead to the ascetical life, and the ascetical life ends up in apatheia. And then finally, apatheia gives birth to agape. Now, what he meant by that is that the spiritual life, of course, can only happen if someone has a gift of faith and is open to progressing in the spiritual life, and especially all those who have been baptized and now are dedicating themselves as mature Christians or seeking to be mature. Fear of God, I think sometimes is misunderstood. Fear of God is not a servile fear. It's not a fear of God. You're afraid if you sin, you'll go to hell or so forth, although that could be what happens. But fear of God here is more to be in awe of God, to understand that God is, as we often talk about, unconditional love. And so it's the idea that God is the beginning and end of all things, and God is the foundation of who we are. And also the idea that God becomes a major feature in every person's spiritual search, in the sense of the remembrance of God. So when I talk about fear of God, I'm talking about the fact that of a constant remembrance of God, that in reality we walk with God. God is there, and He is our partner, and He is our Father. And so fear of God then leads to the commandments. And of course, as the spiritual writers point out, if you don't obey the commandments, then you really don't completely love God. And so the basic beginning point is that you are dedicated to obeying all the commandments, and also the meaning of each commandment. You all recall in the scriptures that Jesus said, "It was said to you of old, but I say to you." And so he goes through the commandments themselves and points out that it's not just thou shalt not kill, but thou shalt not injure yourself, thou shalt not cause bad example, and so forth. So it's not only the commandments in their literal sense, but a life directed towards removing all sin in our lives. But then if we go from the commandments into the ascetical life, where we try to achieve self-control, try to detach ourselves from material things, now we are trying to achieve a point where our body and soul are in harmony. And so that is a long period of time, really a lifetime of trying to achieve that kind of a harmony. And as I mentioned last week, Evagrius uses the Greek term apatheia, which, as I mentioned then, it's not good to translate it by apathy. Apathy is where somebody has no feelings. But apatheia for Evagrius is you reach a stage of your self-control and self-discipline where the passions remain, but they don't really impinge on you anymore. You are so focused and so much in harmony that you allow the passions to be what they are as part of your body, but you are so dedicated and so controlled that you now are seeking a spiritual world, living in a higher world. And then finally, of course, apatheia leads to agape, leads to someone who is a person who lives his or her life based on love of everyone, love of others, love of enemies, and love of everything that God has created. So this is where we were last time, discussing this early stage of the spiritual life. Now, what I want to do tonight is to spend a good part of the time talking about what Evagrius in his book, The Practicus, talks about 8 types of temptations, evil thoughts, evil imaginings. He uses the Greek word logismoi. And for him, this is how what he would call the demons tempt us. But what's interesting about Evagrius is he's not talking about the demons appearing to us in person, as we find when we read about the life of Saint Anthony, but the idea where the demons work in our minds and try to be very subtle in taking some basic fears that humans might have and work on them. And so he talks about 8 different types of these temptations. Now, the interesting thing about what he wrote is that when these writings were transposed to the West, we began to talk about the 7 capital sins. But he talks about 8 logismoi, and I will try to distinguish what happened here in his way of thinking. And so please also remember that Evagrius, first of all, is writing to monks and hermits. And so people who already have really dedicated themselves to a life of virtue and prayer and fasting, and chanting the psalms and vigils and so forth. So these temptations are subtle for the monk or hermit, but they also, I think, can be very helpful in our addressing our own failures or susceptibility to certain temptations. So I'm going to go through each of them very briefly and point out where the temptation is attractive. So the first one, as we know, is the temptation to gluttony. But here with Evagrius, regarding the monks or hermits, We're not talking about overeating and over drinking or getting really obese or whatever. We're talking about the fears that a monk or hermit might have. And so the temptation here is because these people were already, fasting just about 24/7 all year. So what are the temptations? Well, first of all, the idea that if you fast all the time, you're going to end up with ill health. And so the temptation is, eat more than this and make sure you stay in perfect health. Or secondly, that you have to keep an eye on the basic necessities of life, because if you don't stack up on all kinds of foods and so forth, you might run out. And then thirdly, a temptation that you live too far from physicians. So maybe you should give up the spiritual life and go back into the towns and cities. So you can see how this is kind of subtle, especially if someone is developing a weaker health or somebody who's alone for a long time and wondering, what happens as I proceed in this monastic or hermetic life. The second temptation is fornication. Of course, in English, we talk about lust as a capital sin. And here, the idea here is that the way Evagrius puts it is that someone who has a great attachment to being close to other bodies, other human bodies. And so, of course, that kind of desire could lead easily to sin. And the idea here is that the problem is a lack of self-control. In fact, some of the writers say that gluttony can lead you to fornication. I guess the common theme here is that you don't control yourself at all. The other point is the temptation for the young hermit or monk that trying self-control doesn't really work after all. And so that kind of thing may say to him, why bother? The third temptation, or the third, evil imagining has to do with avarice or greed. Now, this one is similar to the first one. The temptation is the fear of a lengthy old age. And here, it's almost similar to what you read in the newspapers today about, especially here in the U.S., people being worried that their retirement money is not going to last them long enough. And so the idea here is, why be in a monastery or a hermitage when you're going to, not you're living too long and you don't have enough to take care of yourself. Also, the idea that famines can come around and take away whatever you might have, and the idea of sicknesses coming to the monk or hermit, and finally to poverty. So again, the temptation is give up this life and go out and set yourself up financially. The next temptation is described as sadness. We use the word envy. And the play on this is not what you normally read about envy, that you're attracted to somebody else's fancy car or whatever. For the monk or hermit, envy is where you wish you remember the memories you had before you went into this religious life. And you remember the good old days when you're at home with your parents and friends and having a good time. And now here you are. And your way of, you don't have any of the real joys that you had in this new life. Everything was kind of very routine. And also the idea that you really miss the idea that you're never going to go back to that life again. And that kind of eats away at you. And so, but then when you're tempted by that, Evagrius points out that you realize what you're thinking about, and you feel embarrassed. You feel that, you've kind of failed yourself. The next temptation is anger. And the spiritual writers spend a lot of time on that. For them, perhaps, again, I'm not a psychologist, but perhaps the idea of men living together in a community. You also had, well, not so much in a desert of women, but men living together in the community. One of the common things that happens, or temptations, is anger. And it's anger that, is a real boiling anger. And the problem with that is you think somebody has done you wrong. And maybe he did, and maybe you thought he did. But now you just can't stand to see that other person. And not only that, it occupies you all the time. How you're going to get even, so to speak. And then what happens is you see the so-called wrongdoer at prayer with you, and your mind is completely distracted. And the more you think about this thing that happened to you, the more you lose sleep at night. And you're unhappy, and you end up debilitated and not being able to pray. So this is a serious temptation. The reason I mention that is it comes up so often with the Syriac writers. Following that is an interesting temptation. In Greek, we use the word akedia. English, we use the word sloth or sloth. And so it gives the idea, first of all, of somebody being lazy, but that's not quite it. Also, for some, even in modern writing, talk about the idea of depression. But that doesn't seem to be an accurate idea either. Akedia, the best way I can put it is you're kind of spiritually bored. In fact, Evagrius talks about the noonday demon. And we think he's referring to Psalm 91 that talks about the sadness that lays waste at midday. And so the idea here is that for the hermit in his hermitage, or the young hermit who's not completely separated from the monastery, but living in close vicinity of other young monks, that this kind of temptation occurs each day between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., where here is the monk or hermit doing his spiritual exercises and doing the readings and doing a few other things like that. And already he's thinking about, when are we going to eat next? And he looks out the window every 5 minutes, wondering how high or low the sun is. And so what happens here is that he then feels kind of, how come nobody comes around? Nobody visits me, and begins to say, I really hate this place. And no visitors. And so the idea now is that maybe, again, I don't belong here. Maybe I can join a different kind of community that lives in the cities and they're well taken care of, and there's a lot of people to be with. And after all, I can serve God, doing something different, and I still can be living a virtuous life. So the idea here is that this kind of temptation is very subtle, and can wear the monk or hermit down. The next temptation is where I get to number 7. And as I said, the Evagrius has 8. So what happens here is that Evagrius distinguishes between vainglory and pride. In the West, we talk about pride, but Evagrius makes a big distinction. For him, vainglory is where someone believes that he has a lot of achievements and a lot of talents, or as being really one of the great spiritual people of all time, and is hoping for people to praise him, is hoping for the word to get out of all the good stuff he is and what an important person he is. And so that is a temptation here, as opposed to pride, where someone believes that he really is completely superior to every other human being. And so we'll talk a little more about that. So vainglory. The person here is looking for praise. In fact, he gets to the point where he has illusions that he's already advanced in the spiritual life, where he's giving retreats, or he's going out and advising people and dealing with them. And he begins to believe that he really is something special. He has the illusions that people find that if he blesses them, they get cured. They want to touch his vestment and so forth. And so he really believes that he is extremely special. And now the main point is, how do we get others to make that public? And so here the idea is that he's not so much concerned with whether the Lord sees him this way, but how people see him. And it gets to a point, where he enslaves himself to other people in order that they will turn around and compliment him, and so think highly of him. So again, this vice, if you want, the spiritual fathers spent a lot of time on that. In some ways, I think they're sometimes suspicious about seeing people in the church who think that they see themselves as too special, or people in authority. And so they keep coming back to this idea of vainglory. Now, you might think that this is strange, but I don't think so. I think even in ordinary life, there's a need a lot at times for people to really want to be praised, and are willing to be nice to people because they want them to be somehow say something good about them, and that in itself kind of narrows your spiritual life. Not only that, but the writers warn is that you're fooling yourself. You're hoping that people will say something about you that you're really not, and so you're not advancing in a spiritual life at all. So this is the real problem with vainglory. And then finally, we have the sin of pride, or the temptation. These are all temptations. The temptation of pride. Here, as they describe it, you don't need God. God has nothing to do with who you are. You are the one who achieves everything. You're the one who is the great spiritual leader. In fact, if people don't see you the way you see yourself, then you consider them fools. So the idea here is that that they're all inferior and they don't even know. They have nothing to compare with you. Now, what the Evagrius points out, that this kind of person ends up by suffering great anger, sadness, and says even madness. And this is the result of pride. Now, what are the remedies for something like this? Well, as you'll find as you read through the various spiritual writers, they will come up with reading the scriptures, vigils, and as you probably know, the monks and the hermits sometimes spend hours at night staying up in prayer because they don't think that you should sleep too much. Constant prayer, fasting, manual labor, solitude. So all these things are how you counteract these various temptations. The other virtues you might practice are meekness and patience, especially if your vice is anger. So these are the ways that one is called upon to treat all these temptations that you're subject to. Now, in a few minutes that I have left, I want to talk about a couple of things that we'll see later on in our talks. The idea of discernment. For the monk and the hermit, the idea here is that, as the spiritual writers say, you really need a spiritual director because it's true of all of us. You're not always a very good judge of yourself. Secondly, you have to be able to find a way to discern whether these experiences you're having are really coming from God or God's grace, or coming from the adversary. And so the whole idea is how you discern what is good and what is not good. As early as the Syriac writer Ephrahat said, he lived in the 4th century, he distinguishes between knowledge and wisdom. He says knowledge tries to enable you to discern right from wrong, but wisdom is more subtle, and it's a faculty that enables you to see what is apparently right and really isn't. And so this is where one has to try to seek it. And again, you're not really able to do it by yourself. Now, how do you determine what is a grace and what is not? Well, the easy answer, if you want, is what is the result of what this temptation is? Is the result you feel at peace, you feel tranquil, you feel that it's enabling you to act virtuously, then it could be from God. But on the other hand, if this temptation, insight, or this religious experience that you have ends up with you feeling coldness, feeling in turmoil, then it probably is not from God at all. And I think I could extend that further. In a sense, as many of you know, in a religious life or in the virtuous life, it's very important to have a real ability to discern, as I say, not only alone, but with your director, because the temptations that come can be very deceptive. For example, even in the, as you know, in the experience of the Catholic Church as such, there's many people who claim that they've had a vision or they've had something really amazing happen to them, and right away they claim that this was an angel from God, or this was an appearance from someone or a saint. And as you know, the church is always very careful because the problem here is you have to make sure that this is going to lead to something good. Now, the same thing applies in the spiritual life, especially if you're a monk or a hermit and you're living alone and so forth. And you prayed before God and you had a real, maybe nothing really visual, but a real kind of inspiration that tells you to behave in a certain way. You really want to make sure that this is not something deceptive. And so discernment is a very important aspect in the spiritual life, and actually for anyone who is living the spiritual life. So I'm going to stop here, and I'd be very happy to answer your questions. I think I saw a comment from Sister Cicely about our temptations sinful. If the normal response to that is that a temptation is not a temptation to some that's sinful unless you respond to it, and so that the temptations can be all the time, but unless you kind of debate the temptation and say, hey, should I do this or not? I'm not sure it's a good thing to do. Then you're looking for trouble. But temptations come all the time. And mainly you just want to resist them if you can.
Thoughts, temptations, we have no control over how often they come and how many are there. And continual, resisting, that can kind of drive you nuts.
I agree. I think the first response I would give is just from my own common sense, is try to occupy yourself with something else. Because sometimes if we just sit there and daydream, it might not be a good idea. Try to go out and take a walk or whatever. But temptations are going to be there.
Chorbishop, I have a question.
Sure.
Out of the eight different thoughts, now they all work kind of subtly. Which do you think is the one that people tend to be least aware of? A lot of times I think, Acadia is one we don't often think of or something like that, but is there some that kind of particularly fly under the radar?
Well, as I said, I'm intrigued by this idea of vainglory, in the sense of we we want to be liked, and yet maybe because we feel so lonely, we relate to someone who really is not in our best interests. I think that can happen. Or, as I say, when somebody wants to get people on their side when they're at work, they'll try to phony up and try to give them gifts and things or whatever. And so it's I think in today's society, we have so many people giving their opinions, like that people want to be popular, and of course now with social media and all that, I really worry about what's happening there, especially with young people who want to be liked, and yet they can get themselves into trouble. So that's one thing that comes to mind. I think it all depends. The other thing is that there is and we all know this, there is, for some people, power is important, or not so much important, but that's what they want. They want power. And so the sin of pride or temptation of pride can really get at you, where you're willing to compromise your own, convictions to gain power. And so, or, you are willing to take advantage of other people to get into a position of power. But I don't know if those are good examples or not, but the anger is obvious. And anger can be very harmful. Certainly in a family, anger can be extremely bad, especially among spouses. No, I don't think Acadia is a big deal. I think that you find it more in people in religious life, where the routine begins to get to them, and things are not working out the way they expected, and so they kind of are tempted to say, let's just get out of here,
Maybe a question related to this last comment. Do you think that as one advances in the spiritual life, there's some temptations that are more prevalent than others?
Well, the hard thing I've never been, let me distinguish it this way. When it comes to the monastic life, I've had no experience. As a quasi-monastic might be in a rector of a seminary, but insofar as in the priestly life, for example, I think that temptations are there of a special kind that many lay people would not be that much influenced by. But I think, for example, in the priestly life, there's a great desire to be recognized, to have the bishop recognize them, to be promoted. The temptations to say, again, some of my parishioners don't like me, and therefore get kind of depressed about that. So I think it depends on what life, what vocation you have. But as far as the spiritual life itself, I think if somebody is really trying to live a virtuous life, I don't think they have as many temptations sometimes to these very obvious, things like gluttony or lust or whatever. It all depends on the person. It depends on. That's why when I was rector of the seminary, I always told the seminarians that never try to grade yourself. It's the Lord who's going to grade you. Just do what you're supposed to do, and or even in the priesthood, just be a very good, active, loving, caring pastor or priest, and everything is fine. But so it all depends on what your vocation is, I think.
I had a question about the discernment. You mentioned like when people say they have visions. I'm wondering, okay, so if someone is, for all intents and purposes, we consider them schizophrenic and they have what they believe and feel deeply was a spiritual experience. They saw the Virgin Mary or whatever. And to them, it truly was a spiritual experience because in their reality, that's what it was. How do you discern that from, like a quote unquote actual experience? Like how does
I think
work?
the answer I usually give is what is the result of that experience? Does it make you feel more virtuous, closer to God? Then there's a positivity there. But if it makes you feel more elitist or more superior or whatever, then that probably is not a good experience. So I think you have to apply the, you won't know maybe right away, but you might find out if you're still experiencing what the results of that over a period of weeks or months. So where are you now, virtuously? Are you better or worse? And so if you're better, it might be from God, it might not, but it's okay because you're better. So when the devil took Jesus on top of the mountain and says to him, I'll give you the whole world if you just obey me. Jesus said, no way, Jose, so it depends on, as I say, the result.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay, what is it?
Sister Cicely wrote, after doing some good for people, is it vainglory to feel good about it?
To feel good about it yourself? No, it's not. To feel the idea that, hey, this did some good, I guess I'm special, then you're dealing with not being very humble. As I said, vainglory is more you're to put it in a way, you're kind of insecure. You feel that why don't people think I'm somebody great, and so but no, do as much good as you can. But I don't know if I gave a good example when I was talking about it. That what I'm talking about is someone who compromises on their own convictions in order to have other people praise them or promote them or whatever. So that would be more vainglory. In fact, the spiritual writers sometimes attack bishops. Some of them are very suspect. In fact, some of the spiritual writers said that bishops should really resign and become monks and so forth. So so the idea here is that if you really want to proceed spiritually, you shouldn't be a bishop there because there's too much power there. Now, of course, that's why bishops don't like some monks either. Well, I give you all a blessing here. Blessing, Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, descend upon you and preserve you from all evil. Amen. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Chorbishop.